The call came at 5:47 inches the morning. I was already up, the way men my age tend to be unable to sleep past 4 anymore, sitting at my kitchen table in Cookeville, Tennessee, with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, watching the darkness thin out over the backyard. My wife had passed 3 years before. The house had too much quiet in it now, the kind that presses against your ears until you hear things that are not there. My phone buzzed against the counter. I did not recognize the number at first. Something made me answer anyway. Howard? One word. I knew the voice immediately. I had not heard it in over 2 years. Not since the last birthday card I mailed to my granddaughter came back to me unopened, the envelope wrinkled like it had been handled and set down several times before someone finally decided to send it back. Renee. Silence on the other end. Then, it's Lily. She's sick. I set down my coffee cup. My hand was steadier than I expected. What kind of sick? Aplastic anemia. Her bone marrow stopped producing. The doctors are saying she needs a transplant or her voice broke. She pulled it back together. They need donors, family donors first. Howard, I didn't know who else to call. My son Daniel had been gone for 5 years. A utility pole on a rain-slicked highway outside Nashville. He was 39 years old. Lily had been 9 when her father died, and I had spent the 2 years after that funeral trying to hold on to her and her mother the best I could. Then, Renee met a man named Brett Hargrove. They married inside of a year, and slowly, the way these things happen, my granddaughter became a stranger to me. It was never a fight. No screaming, no lawyers, no formal decree. Just a gradual pulling away. Visits got shorter. Phone calls stopped being returned. Then the birthday cards started coming back. Renee never said the words out loud. She did not have to. The message was clear enough. You are a reminder of something painful, and we are trying to move forward. I was 63 years old. I had buried a wife and a son. I knew what grief looked like when it needed someone to blame. Tell me where she is, I said. Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. I was on the road by 6:30. The drive from Cookeville took just under an hour, and I spent most of it talking to my son the way I sometimes did when I was alone in the truck. Not praying, exactly. Just talking, telling him I was going. Telling him I was not going to let his little girl go through this without someone from his side of the family standing in that hospital. I found Renee in a waiting area near the pediatric oncology ward on the 6th floor. She looked tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Brett was beside her, a tall man with the kind of jawline that photographs well. He stood when I walked in, extended a hand. I shook it. We did not speak beyond that. Renee stood too. For a moment, we just looked at each other across everything that had passed between us. Thank you for coming, she said. She's my granddaughter. Something flickered across Renee's face. She nodded and looked away. Lily was sleeping when they let me into her room. She was 14 years old now, and she looked so much like my son that it stopped my breath for a moment. The same dark eyebrows, the same way her mouth relaxed slightly open when she slept. Daniel had slept that way too. I used to check on him when he was small, standing in the doorway of his room just watching him breathe, amazed that something I had made could be so perfectly itself. I sat in the chair beside her bed and held her hand until a nurse came to take me downstairs for the compatibility testing. The process took the better part of 2 hours. Blood draw, cheek swab, a long questionnaire about my medical history. The hematologist who handled my intake was a younger woman, efficient and thorough. She explained that bone marrow compatibility depended on HLA markers, proteins on the surface of blood cells, and that a grandparent match was possible but statistically less likely than a sibling or parent match. What are the odds? I asked. We'll know more once we process the results. Come back in 3 hours. I went to the hospital cafeteria. I bought a sandwich I did not eat and a second cup of coffee that went as cold as the first one. Brett had disappeared somewhere. Renee sat across the cafeteria near the windows, staring at her phone. We did not join each other. There was too much space between us and not enough energy to cross it. I thought about Lily. About the last real visit I could remember, a Christmas 2 years before Daniel died, when she had insisted on showing me a dance routine she learned from a video on the internet. She had practiced it for weeks, apparently, and she performed it with complete seriousness in the living room while Daniel and I sat on the couch trying not to laugh, not because it was bad, but because it was so earnest and so hers. When she finished, she bowed. We clapped. She said very solemnly, "Grandpa, you have to admit that was professional." I had laughed until I cried. I had not laughed like that since. When the 3 hours were up, a different doctor came to find me in the waiting area near the elevator bank. He was older, gray at the temples, with the careful expression of a man who had delivered difficult news many times and still found it hard. He asked me to come with him. Not back to the testing room where I had been before. To a smaller office on a different floor. There were 2 other doctors already seated when we walked in. A woman in a lab coat who was introduced as their head of genetics. A younger man who handled hematology. They all had folders. They all had the same careful expression. "Mr. Briggs," the older doctor began, "we ran your compatibility panel twice to make sure of the results. Am I a match?" "No, you're not." He paused. "But there's something else we need to discuss with you. Something the testing revealed that goes beyond the compatibility question." I looked around at the 3 of them. The geneticist was watching me with something that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Briggs." She leaned forward slightly. "The genetic analysis we ran shows no biological relationship between you and Lily." The words arrived in my ears and then seemed to stop somewhere short of meaning. I sat with them for a moment. "That's not possible. She's my son's daughter. We understand this is difficult to hear. But HLA typing combined with a full genetic panel is extremely reliable. There are no shared genetic markers between you and Lily that would indicate a grandparent-grandchild relationship." She set a paper on the table in front of me. "I'm sorry. We checked 3 times." I stared at the paper without reading it. "What you're telling me," I said slowly, "is that my son Daniel was not Lily's biological father." The 3 doctors exchanged a brief look. The older one answered, "That is what the results indicate. Yes." The room did not spin. I was too old for rooms to spin. Instead, everything went very still, the way it had when the state trooper knocked on my door 5 years ago to tell me about the highway outside Nashville. That same terrible stillness, like the world pausing to let you absorb something it was about to make permanent. My son had raised that girl for 9 years. He had coached her soccer team and helped her through the 2nd grade when reading was hard and held her hand at every doctor's appointment she ever had. He had called me on a Tuesday in March 2017, so excited he could barely form a sentence, to tell me Renee was pregnant. He had cried in the delivery room. He had sent me a photo of himself holding a newborn with an expression on his face like a man who has just understood what his life was actually for. And none of it was his. I do not know how long I sat in that office. The doctors gave me water. They were kind. Eventually I thanked them and walked out into the corridor, and I stood there for a while with my hand against the wall, not going anywhere, just making sure my legs still worked. Then I went to find Renee. She was back in the 6th floor waiting area, alone now. Brett had gone to get food somewhere. She looked up when I came around the corner, and whatever was on my face told her immediately that something had happened beyond the compatibility results. She stood up slowly. "Fletcher," she started, then caught herself. "Howard." "What's wrong?" "I need you to sit back down." She sat. I pulled a chair over and sat across from her, close enough that I could keep my voice low. The test came back. I'm not a match. I watched her face. But that's not the part I'm here to talk about. She had gone very still. The genetics panel showed I have no biological relationship to Lily. I waited a beat, which means Daniel wasn't her father. Renee closed her eyes. She did not say it was impossible. She did not say there must be a mistake. She just sat there with her eyes closed. And in that silence, I had my answer before she said a single word. "Renee, I know." Her voice was barely audible. "How long have you known?" A long exhale. since before she was born. Before she was born, Daniel had spent 9 years as that little girl's father. 9 years of birthday parties and ear infections and homework and bedtime stories, and a funeral he never got to have because he died on a highway before his daughter was old enough to understand what she was losing. And the entire time, his wife knew. "Who is he?" She shook her head, looked at her hands. "Renee. There is a sick child upstairs who needs a bone marrow donor. The man who fathered her may be the only viable option. So I need a name." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "His name is Shane Coulter. We worked together. It was one time, Howard. I need you to understand that. It was one time and it was a mistake and I was going to tell Daniel, but then I found out I was pregnant and I was terrified, and by the time I knew I was keeping the baby it was too late to she stopped, pressed her fingers to her mouth. I convinced myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself she was Daniel's because I needed her to be Daniel's. She wasn't. No. I stood up. My knees ached, the way they always did now. I had spent 31 years as an electrician, climbing ladders and kneeling in crawl spaces, and my body remembered every one of those years whether I wanted it to or not. "Find Shane Coulter," I said. "Today. Whatever it takes. He may be the only person who can save her life. Howard." She grabbed my arm. "Are you going to tell her? Are you going to tell Lily?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then I looked at her face. She was frightened, and she was exhausted, and underneath all of it she was a woman who had made a terrible choice a long time ago and spent years waiting for it to catch up with her. "That's not my decision to make," I said. "But she's going to figure it out on her own, Renee. She's a smart girl. Her father's daughter, in every way that counts." I pulled my arm free and walked down the hall toward the elevator. I made it to the stairwell before I sat down on the top step and put my face in my hands. I did not cry, not exactly. My body wanted to and could not quite manage it. I was too tired and too old and too hollowed out from the last 5 years of loss to produce anything as clean as tears. What I felt instead was something I did not have a good word for. Like a wound being reopened in a place I had already accepted would always hurt. My son had loved a child who was not his, completely and without reservation, for 9 years. He had been deceived for 9 years. He had died never knowing. And now his daughter was upstairs in a hospital bed, and the only person who could save her was a stranger she had never met. And I was nobody. Not biologically, not legally. Just an old man who used to be someone's grandfather. Except I did not feel like nobody. I felt like a man sitting in a stairwell who was going to stand back up in a few minutes and go back upstairs and sit by that girl's bed, because she had called me Grandpa since she learned to talk, and that did not disappear because of a piece of paper. I stood up, went back upstairs. Lily was awake when I came in. She was propped against her pillows, pale and thin in a way that made my chest tighten, but her eyes were alert. Those dark eyebrows, so much like Daniel's. I was going to have to stop noticing that. "Grandpa." Her voice was rough from the medication. "Mom said you came." "Of course I came." I sat in the chair beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Like garbage." A faint smile. "The nurses say that's normal." "The nurses are right. You're allowed to feel like garbage. You're sick." She laughed quietly, then winced. "Did they test you?" "Are you a match?" "I'm not, sweetheart." "I'm sorry." She deflated slightly. "That's okay. They said grandparents are usually long shots anyway." She looked at me for a moment. "You drove all the way from Cookville just for the test?" "I drove all the way from Cookville for you. The test was secondary." She was quiet for a while. Outside the window, the Nashville skyline was gray and flat under a February sky. A machine beside her bed beeped at steady intervals. "Grandpa," she said finally, "do you think about my dad a lot?" "Every day." "Me too." She turned the edge of her blanket over in her fingers. "I was scared you'd stop thinking about us. After you stopped visiting, I never stopped. That was not my choice, Lily. I want you to know that." She looked at me directly then, with the clear-eyed directness that children have before the world teaches them to look away from difficult things. I figured that out eventually, she said. Mom and Brett never really explained it, but I figured it out. She was smart. She always had been. I had known that since she was 4 years old and had explained to me, very patiently, that dinosaurs were not actually boring. I just needed to learn more about them. Get some rest, I said. I'll be here when you wake up. I stayed all day. Finding Shane Coulter took 4 days. Renee hired someone through her attorney, an investigator who specialized in locating people quickly. He was living in Murfreesboro, not 40 minutes from the hospital, working as a project manager for a construction company. He was 46 years old. He had a wife and a 12-year-old son. Renee made the call herself. I was not there for it. But I saw her afterward, sitting in the hospital cafeteria with the look of someone who had just jumped off a very high bridge and was still falling. "He's coming, Yenny," she said. "He said he needed a day to talk to his wife, but he's coming." Did he know? Did he suspect? She shook her head. He said he didn't. He said after that night he never heard from me again, and he assumed. She stopped. He assumed nothing had come of it. And now he has a daughter he's never met who needs his bone marrow to live. Renee said nothing. Coulter arrived on a Thursday morning. He was a tall man, heavier than he probably used to be, with gray just starting at the sides of his hair. He walked into the hospital looking like a man who was not sure he should have come and had come anyway, which I supposed was something. We met briefly in the corridor. Renee introduced us. I shook his hand. He looked at me with the expression of a man trying to understand what I was doing there, who I was, what my presence meant in this equation. "Howard raised her," Renee said quietly. "Her grandfather." He nodded slowly. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly, or not only guilt, more like the weight of a thing suddenly becoming real. The testing took the rest of the morning. Renee and Brett and I sat in 3 different corners of the waiting area, not quite together and not entirely separate. Brett had been quieter since the truth came out. I did not know what Renee had told him, or when. I did not ask. Dr. Anita Mercer, the lead on Lily's case, came out to the waiting area at 2 in the afternoon. She looked from face to face, taking in the unusual configuration of people assembled there. "Mr. Coulter," she said, "you're a strong match. 8 out of 10 HLA markers. It's not perfect, but it's the best we've had. If you're willing to proceed, we can schedule the procedure within the week." Shane Coulter exhaled loudly. "Yes. Whatever she needs. Yes." Renee burst into tears. Brett put his arm around her. I sat very still and felt something loosen in my chest that had been locked tight since 5:47 on a Monday morning when my phone buzzed against a cold kitchen counter. Lily was going to live. They told her that evening. About Shane. About what the tests had revealed. Renee and Brett went in together. I waited outside in the hall. I could hear, not the words exactly, but the rhythm of it. Renee's voice, low and careful. A long silence. Then Lily's voice, higher, asking something. Another silence. Then Renee again, longer this time. I waited for 45 minutes. Then the door opened and Renee came out. Her eyes were red. She looked at me and said nothing, just nodded toward the room, and I went in. Lily was sitting up in her bed. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked older than she had that morning, the way children look after someone has told them something that cannot be untold. I sat in my chair and waited. "Did you know?" she asked. "Not until the test results. But you figured it out before you told Mom. Didn't you?" It was not quite a question. "Yes." She nodded, looked at her hands. "I keep trying to be angry, but I'm too tired." She paused. "Mom says she's sorry. She said it a lot. What did you say back?" "I said I needed time to think." She looked up at me. "Is that bad?" "That's honest. Honest is never bad." She was quiet for a while. The machine beeped. Outside the window, the sun had gone down and the city was all lit up in the dark. "Grandpa," she said, "my dad wasn't my real dad. Your dad was exactly your real dad. Every day of your life until the day he died. But biologically, biology is where you start. It is not what you're made of." I leaned forward in my chair. Your dad took you to the emergency room 3 times before you turned 5. He sat up all night when you had the flu. He drove you to soccer practice in the rain every Saturday for 4 years. He called me every week to tell me something new and amazing you had said or done. My voice caught slightly. I steadied it. That is your real father, Lily. Everything else is just science. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, You're not my real grandfather either. Biologically. No, I'm not. Does that bother you? I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. What bothers me, I said, is that I lost 2 years with you because I was too old and too tired to fight hard enough to stay in your life. That bothers me every single day. The biology doesn't bother me at all. You have been my granddaughter since the day you were born. That is not a thing a DNA test can undo. She reached out and took my hand the way she used to when she was small, when she needed help crossing a street or was afraid of something she could not name. Her fingers were thin. The IV line ran along the back of her wrist. Okay, she said simply. Okay? I just needed to hear you say it. We sat like that until the night nurse came in to check her vitals. Shane Coulter donated his bone marrow 8 days later. The procedure went smoothly. 1 piece as dime. Lily received the transplant on a Tuesday afternoon, and within 2 weeks the preliminary markers were showing exactly what the doctors had hoped for. Her body was accepting it. The counts were climbing. She was going to make it. Shane visited once during Lily's recovery. He sat with her for about 30 minutes. I was not in the room, but I watched through the small window in the door. He was awkward and earnest and clearly overwhelmed, a stranger trying to become something in a very short time. Lily was polite with him. Careful. She shook his hand when he left, the way you shake the hand of someone you have just met and do not yet know what to do with. He flew back to Murfreesboro that evening. I heard later that he and his wife were going to counseling. I hoped that worked out for them. Not for his sake, necessarily, but because his 12-year-old son deserved a stable household, and that boy had done nothing wrong. Renee and I did not become friends. I do not think that was ever going to be possible, and I think she understood that. But 2 weeks after Lily's transplant, she called me and asked if I would come to the hospital to see Lily before they discharged her. Not as a courtesy, as something real. I drove back down to Nashville on a Friday morning. Lily was dressed and sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, waiting to go home. She looked better, more color in her face. The dark circles were fading. When I walked in, she stood up, and then she crossed the room and hugged me the way she had not hugged me since she was 12 years old, before the distance set in, before the unreturned phone calls and the birthday cards that came back unopened. She held on the way Daniel used to when he was small, with both arms, completely. I told Mom, she said into my shoulder, that I want to see you every month, and she said yes. I held on and did not say anything for a while. Brett was waiting in the corridor when we came out. He looked at me with an expression that had more in it than I expected. Something like respect, or the beginning of it. She talks about you, he said. She always has. Even when he stopped, chose his words, even when visits stopped. She never stopped talking about you. I nodded. Did not know what else to do with that. The drive back to Cookville took 45 minutes. The hills were just starting to green up, that pale, soft green of early spring that only lasts about 2 weeks before the heat comes in and darkens everything. I had always loved that particular green. My wife used to call it the polite green, the color of something that knows it will not last and shows up anyway. I thought about Daniel, about all the things he had not known and would never know, about the 9 years he had spent as a father to a girl who was not biologically his, with no knowledge that the biology was different, loving her the way fathers love daughters when they have no reason to love them any differently. I wondered sometimes if it would have mattered to him. If he had known at the beginning, would he have loved Lily less? I did not think so. I did not think Daniel had that kind of conditional in him. He was a better man than me in a lot of ways. More patient, less prone to the slow-burning grudges that I had always carried too long. But he never got to choose. That was the cruelty of it. He never got the chance to look at the truth and decide what to do with it. Renee had made that choice for him, and then the highway outside Nashville had made all the other choices irrelevant. I kept a photograph on my mantelpiece. It was taken at Lily's 6th birthday party in the backyard of the house Daniel and Renee had back then, a house I had helped him paint the summer before Lily was born. In the photo, Daniel is lifting Lily up onto his shoulders so she can reach the top of a piñata they had hung from the oak tree. She is swinging a plastic bat with enormous seriousness. Daniel is grinning up at her. I used to look at that photo and think about what I did not know when it was taken. All the things underneath the surface of that ordinary Saturday afternoon. The lie that had been living inside their family since before Lily could walk. Now I looked at it differently. I looked at it and saw a man who loved his daughter, who lifted her up when she needed to reach something higher, who grinned because he was happy, genuinely and completely happy, in a way that nothing that came later could entirely retroactively erase. The happiness was real. The love was real. The Saturday afternoon was real. Whatever Renee had done, she could not take that from him. And she could not take it from Lily. And she could not take it from me. Lily called me on a Wednesday evening about 3 weeks after she came home from the hospital. Just to talk, she said. She had started back at school part-time. Her hair was growing back. She was still tired, but less than before. Her friend group had been good, apparently. Better than she expected. "Grandpa," she said, "do you think about what makes a family? Like, actually makes a family?" "I think about it a lot lately." "Me too." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking that a family is like the people who show up. Not just when it's easy. The people who show up when it's hard and confusing and there's no good reason to except that they just do." I sat with that for a moment. "Where did you get that from?" "I don't know. I've just been thinking." A pause. "Did I get it right?" "Yeah, sweetheart," I said. "I think you got it exactly right." She came to Cookville the following weekend. She walked around the house the way she used to when she was small, touching things she remembered, asking about things that were new. She found the photograph on the mantelpiece and stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "I want a copy of this. I'll have one made, for my room." She turned to look at me, so I don't forget what he looked like when he was happy. I went to the kitchen so she would not see my face. She stayed for 2 nights. We drove out to the state park on Saturday morning, the one my son had loved as a boy, where the trail follows a creek through a narrow valley, and the water is so clear you can see the bottom even when it is deep. We walked slowly because she's still tired easily. We did not talk much. We did not need to. At one point, she stopped on the trail and looked up at the trees coming into leaf overhead, that same pale early spring green, and she said, "I forgot how good outside smells." "You've been inside too long?" "I know." She started walking again. We're fixing that. She is 15 now. She comes to Cookville once a month, sometimes more. She has started asking questions about Daniel, what he was like as a boy, what made him laugh, what he was afraid of, all the things she cannot ask Renee without it becoming complicated. I tell her everything I remember. I am trying to tell her all of it before I forget any of it. We are both working against time in our own ways. Shane Coulter and Lily have exchanged a few emails. Tentative, careful. He knows his place, and I think he is trying to be decent about it. She told me she is not ready to meet his family yet. Maybe someday. Maybe not. That is her decision to make, and I will support whatever she decides. My relationship with Renee is civil. We are never going to be what we were before Daniel died, but we were never going to be that anyway. Too much has passed. Too much was hidden for too long. But she loves Lily genuinely, whatever else is true about her, and she has made room for me in Lily's life in a way she shut me out of before. I accept that. I do not need more than that. I will be 64 in the fall. My knees hurt every morning. I sleep badly and drink too much coffee, and sometimes I sit at my kitchen table in the early hours before the light comes up and talk to people who are no longer there. My son, my wife, the people who made my life make sense. But I am not only doing that anymore. I'm also waiting for my phone to ring. Waiting for a voice to say, "Grandpa, I was just calling to talk." Waiting for a car to pull into my driveway on a Saturday morning with a 15-year-old who wants to walk the trail by the creek because she has been inside too long and she is fixing that. Some mornings that is enough. Some mornings it is more than enough. A man I used to work with told me once that the hardest part of getting old was watching the things you built your life around turn out to be something other than what you thought they were. I understood what he meant then. I understand it differently now. Because sometimes the thing you built your life around turns out to be more solid than the story you were told about it. My son loved his daughter. She loved her father. I loved both of them and still do. That is the actual structure, the truth underneath the lie. Biology is a fact. Presence is a choice. And the people who chose, every ordinary day, to show up, those are the ones who matter. That is what I know now. That is what 63 years and a DNA test and a sick little girl in a hospital bed taught me at 5:47 in the morning when I almost did not answer the phone. Show up. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. So let me ask you something before we go. Think about the people in your life who showed up when they did not have to, when it was inconvenient or painful, or when there was no biological or legal requirement telling them they had to be there. Think about those people. Do they know what they mean to you? If this story moved you at all, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button. And if you want more stories like this, real people, hard moments, the love that holds when everything else breaks, subscribe to the channel. New stories every week. I will see you in the next one.